abandoned in the desert to pay for what he did, but what he found changed his life. Daniel Crawford never imagined his own brothers could be capable of such cruelty. There he was, abandoned in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, with only the clothes on his back and a few work tools scattered around him in the scorching sand. The truck had disappeared over the horizon more than an hour ago, taking with it Brandon and Tyler, his younger brothers who had always respected him as the eldest of the family. But now they had shouted words of hatred and accusation before leaving, blaming him for destroying their father's legacy and leaving the whole family in poverty. Daniel knew he had done nothing wrong, but the evidence all seemed to be against him. The midday sun punished him mercilessly as he tried to process what had happened. 3 days ago, he was the respected manager of the family's well drilling company, built with great sacrifice by their father, Thomas Crawford. Today he was being treated as a thief and a traitor by his own blood brothers. The accusations still echoed in his mind. Brandon had found documents proving irregular money transfers from the company to accounts in his, Daniel's, name. Tyler had discovered fake contracts he had apparently signed, diverting expensive equipment to shell companies. Everything seemed very well orchestrated to frame him. Daniel stood up with difficulty, feeling the weight of his 45 years in his aching back. His red shirt was already torn in places, a result of the violent argument they'd had before abandoning him there. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. He knew this arid region of rural Arizona well, where the family had drilled dozens of wells over the years. The irony was cruel. Here he was, a man who had dedicated his entire adult life to finding water underground for needy communities, now dying of thirst in the same kind of terrain where he had always been a hero. The tools thrown around him, a shovel, a pickaxe, and some metal pipes, seemed to mock his desperate situation. Daniel tried to reason about what could have happened. Someone had forged his signature on the documents, that was certain. Someone had access to the company's systems and bank accounts, someone who knew the business operations well and knew exactly how to frame him convincingly. His mind flew to Jessica, his ex-wife, from whom he had divorced 2 years ago after a troubled 15-year marriage. She had always shown unusual knowledge about the family business, even though she didn't officially work at the company. During the divorce, she had demanded a share of assets that didn't even legally belong to her. The first day in the desert was pure desperation. Daniel tried to walk toward the nearest road, but the intense heat and lack of water forced him to look for some shade. He found a small rocky outcrop that offered some relief from the scorching sun and decided to wait for nightfall to try to move again. During the night, temperatures plummeted drastically, and he had to wrap himself in his own shirt to try to stay warm. The silence of the Sonoran Desert was broken only by the nighttime sounds of small animals and the wind blowing through the saguaro and cholla cacti. Daniel spent hours awake, going over every detail of the last few months at the company. He remembered strange conversations between Brandon and Jessica during family gatherings after the divorce. At the time, he thought it was just courtesy between ex-in-laws, but now he began to suspect there was something more behind those whispered conversations. Jessica had always been an ambitious and manipulative woman, capable of great performances to get what she wanted. The second day brought an overwhelming thirst that began to affect his reasoning. Daniel knew that in an arid region like that, survival without water was no more than 3 to 4 days. He tried to dig a hole near an area where the vegetation seemed a bit greener, hoping to find some shallow groundwater. It was then that he heard a faint bark in the distance. Daniel looked up and saw a dark figure approaching slowly. It was a medium-sized dog, all black, that seemed to be in conditions almost as bad as his own. The animal was visibly dehydrated and thin, but its eyes showed a peculiar intelligence. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The dog approached cautiously, sniffing the air around Daniel. It showed no aggression, only a weary curiosity. Daniel slowly extended his hand, trying to gain the animal's trust. When he managed to touch it, he noticed it was wearing a leather collar worn and faded by the sun. Examining the collar more closely, Daniel found a small, nearly illegible metal tag. Cleaning it carefully, he managed to read the engraved name. St. Thomas Farm, Daniel Crawford. His heart raced. That was the farm where he had grown up with his brothers, the property his father had left them before starting the drilling company. But that was impossible. St. Thomas Farm had been sold over 10 years ago to settle debts from when they were starting the business. At least, that's what everyone had always believed. Daniel examined the collar again, looking for any date or other clue that could explain this disturbing coincidence. The dog seemed to be trying to guide him in a specific direction. Every time Daniel tried to go another way, the animal would whimper softly and pull in the opposite direction. Deciding he didn't have many options, Daniel chose to follow the dog's instinct. Any destination would be better than dying of thirst there. They walked for hours under the relentless sun. The dog seemed to know every stone and every trail in that region. Daniel recognized some rock formations that indicated they were approaching the area where his family's old farm was located. His legs trembled with weakness, but the hope of finding some water source kept him moving. It was when he spotted something that made his heart race even more. On the horizon, surrounded by date palms and lush vegetation, was a true oasis. The sight was so surreal that Daniel thought he was having hallucinations caused by dehydration, but the dog ran toward the spot, confirming it was real. Getting closer, Daniel recognized the place immediately. It was exactly where the headquarters of St. Thomas Farm had been, but instead of the ruins he expected to find after so many years of abandonment, there was a spring of crystal-clear water bubbling up from the middle of carefully arranged rocks. The palm trees were huge and healthy, creating generous shade around the spring. Daniel threw himself into the cool water, drinking eagerly and feeling life return to his body. The dog did the same, lapping the water with evident gratitude. Only after quenching his thirst was Daniel able to observe his surroundings better. There were clear signs that someone regularly cared for this place. The area around the spring was clean, free of dry leaves and debris. There was a small stone structure that seemed to have been built recently, meant to protect visitors from the sun and rain. Most importantly, Daniel noticed that the water distribution system had been improved with modern pipes and a small reservoir. Exploring the area more carefully, he found a metal box buried shallowly near the base of one of the larger date palms. The box was protected by thick plastic and contained several well-preserved documents. Daniel's hands trembled when he recognized the letterhead from the notary's office, where his father had always handled the family's legal matters. The first document he picked up was a property transfer deed dated 3 years earlier. According to the paper, St. Thomas Farm had been transferred from Crawford Drilling to the name of Jessica Crawford Miller, his ex-wife. The signature was recognizably his, but Daniel was absolutely certain he had never signed that document. Continuing to examine the papers, he found copies of bank statements showing a series of transfers from the company account to personal accounts in Jessica's name. There were also correspondences between her and a lawyer, discussing strategies to recover the assets that were rightfully hers after the marriage. But the most shocking discovery was at the bottom of the box. A series of photographs showed Jessica in intimate meetings with Brandon, his younger brother. The photos were dated over 3 years ago, still during the period when he was married to her. The betrayal wasn't recent, but rather a parallel relationship that had lasted for years. Along with the photos, there were letters written in the lover's own handwriting. In the correspondence, Jessica and Brandon discussed detailed plans to take over the Crawford family assets. They had carefully planned each step: the messy divorce, the forgery of documents, the manipulation of Tyler against Daniel, and finally the abandonment in the desert. One of the letters revealed that Brandon had always been jealous of his older brother, feeling wronged in the division of company responsibilities. Jessica had skillfully exploited this sense of injustice, convincing him that Daniel was harming them and that they deserved to keep a larger share of the family business. The plan was diabolical in its simplicity. First, they forged Daniel's signature on several documents, creating evidence of corruption and embezzlement. Then, they manipulated Tyler by showing only the evidence that confirmed the older brother's guilt. Finally, they provoked the situation that resulted in the desert abandonment, hoping Daniel would disappear forever. Daniel felt a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. Anger at the double betrayal by his wife and brother. Sadness upon realizing that Tyler had been just a victim of manipulation, just like himself. and relief at finally understanding that he wasn't going crazy and that he was truly innocent of all the accusations. But there was something else in that box that caught his attention. An older document in the shaky handwriting of his father, Thomas Crawford. It was a kind of informal will where the old man explained his plans for the farm. According to the text, Thomas had discovered a permanent natural water source on the property and dreamed of turning the place into a support center for farm workers and travelers in the region. The document revealed that the water source Daniel had just discovered was not a natural accident. His father had secretly invested in piping and improving the spring, planning that one day the family could return to that place and continue the project. The farm should never have been sold, but rather kept as a family heritage for future generations. Reading more carefully, Daniel discovered that his father had left specific instructions on how to expand the irrigation system and create a small hostel for people in need. There were even technical drawings showing where to drill new wells and how to connect everything to an integrated water distribution system. The revelation completely changed Daniel's perspective on his situation. Instead of being an abandoned victim left to suffer, he was exactly where his father wanted him to be. The tools his brothers had ironically thrown by his side were precisely what he would need to continue Thomas's dream. That night, sleeping protected by the small stone structure next to the spring, Daniel made a decision that would change his life forever. He would not seek revenge against Jessica and Brandon through lawsuits or confrontations. Instead, he would prove his worth and character by building something positive in that abandoned place. The dog, which had now become his inseparable companion, slept by his side like a faithful guardian. Daniel realized the animal had probably been abandoned there by someone who knew the farm's story and knew that sooner or later a person in need would appear who could care for it. The next morning, Daniel began to work. First, he examined the entire existing water system, identifying points that needed repair or improvement. His decades of experience in well drilling proved invaluable for understanding the spring's underground structure and expansion possibilities. Using the available tools, he began clearing pipes clogged with sediment and leaves. The work was arduous under the strong sun, but each small progress brought a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. He was doing something constructive with his own hands, without depending on contracts or signed papers. The dog proved to be a surprisingly helpful assistant. It seemed to instinctively understand what Daniel was trying to do, and often pointed its snout at specific tools or areas needing attention. It was as if the animal had a special connection to that place and wanted to see it thrive again. After 3 days of intense work, Daniel managed to completely restore the spring's water flow. What was once just a trickle had transformed into a generous stream that fed a series of smaller channels around the area. The vegetation responded immediately, becoming greener and more lush each day. It was then that he received his first visit. A family of farm workers appeared at the oasis, clearly desperate for water. There were 5 people, an elderly couple, 2 young adults, and a child, traveling in an old truck looking for work on the region's farms. The older man explained they had been lost for 2 days and had only a few drops of water left in their containers. The child, a girl of about 8, was visibly dehydrated and weak. Daniel did not hesitate to offer all the help he could, guiding them to the spring and sharing the shade of the stone structure. As the family recovered, Daniel talked at length with them about the region and its hardships. He discovered that many people regularly passed through that area, but the lack of reliable water points made travel extremely dangerous. There were reports of entire families who had gotten lost on the way and were never found again. The account touched Daniel deeply. He realized his work there could have a much greater impact than he had initially imagined. It wasn't just about continuing his father's dream, but about creating something that would truly save lives. The idea of transforming that oasis into a permanent support point for travelers began to take shape in his mind. Before leaving, the family insisted on leaving some supplies as a thank you. Daniel tried to refuse, but the older man was categorical. "Son, whoever saves lives like you saved ours deserves to be blessed. One day you'll need this food, and when that day comes, you'll remember that the good you did came back to you." Alone again with the dog, Daniel reflected on the traveler's words. There was a poetic justice in finding purpose and happiness exactly where he should have found only suffering and abandonment. His betrayers thought they were condemning him, but they actually freed him to discover his true calling. In the following weeks, more people began appearing at the oasis. Word spread that there was a source of clean, reliable water in that region, cared for by a kind man who charged nothing for his hospitality. Daniel developed a routine of always keeping dry firewood available for bonfires, fresh water in clean containers, and an organized space for rest. Each visitor brought different stories, but all with the same central theme: the struggle for survival in a region where drought and poverty made each day a battle. Daniel began to understand that his abandonment in the desert had been, ironically, his salvation. If he had remained in the city dealing with lawsuits and family disputes, he would never have discovered this way of helping people truly in need. The dog, which he decided to call Guardian, became a beloved presence among the visitors. The animal had a special gift for sensing when someone was particularly distressed or ill, offering silent companionship in the most difficult moments. Several people commented that the dog's presence had brought comfort in times of despair. One day, a more experienced traveling merchant arrived at the oasis and was impressed with the organization and care of the place. He explained to Daniel that he had traveled throughout that region for decades and had never seen such a well-maintained waypoint. He offered help to formalize the property's legal situation and suggested ways to expand the services offered. The merchant, named Walter, revealed that he knew the history of St. Thomas Farm and the Crawford family well. He had been a friend of Thomas and knew the original plans to transform the place into a regional support center. Walter offered to help Daniel navigate the necessary bureaucracy to legalize his possession of the land and obtain the proper permits. Through Walter, Daniel learned that Jessica and Brandon were facing serious legal difficulties. Apparently, their forgeries had been discovered by independent auditors during a routine Federal Revenue Service investigation. They were being sued for fraud and embezzlement, and all assets obtained illegally would be confiscated. The news brought conflicting feelings for Daniel. On one hand, there was a natural satisfaction in seeing justice being done. On the other hand, he felt genuine sadness for Brandon, who had been manipulated by Jessica just as he himself had been. Tyler, according to Walter, was desperately trying to distance himself from the scandals and had tried to find Daniel to apologize. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing, Daniel asked Walter to relay a message to Tyler, that he was well, had forgiven everyone and was building a new life based on helping others. He did not want his younger brother to carry unnecessary guilt for what had happened. Tyler had been a victim of the manipulation as much as anyone. With Walter's help, Daniel managed to regularize his situation at the farm. It turned out that legally the transfer to Jessica was void due to the forgeries, and the property had automatically reverted to the legitimate heirs of Thomas Crawford. As the eldest brother and the only one present to claim the rights, Daniel became the official owner. The legalization opened new possibilities to expand the project. Walter helped Daniel apply for licenses to operate a small inn and a support post for travelers. He also guided him on how to obtain government funding for sustainable rural development projects. Months passed, and the oasis transformed into a true regional center of reference. Daniel built several small cabins for lodging, expanded the irrigation system to create a community garden, and installed solar panels to provide basic electricity, all while always maintaining the principle that essential services, water, emergency shelter, and first aid, would always be free for those in need. Daniel's personal transformation was equally impressive. The bitter, proud man who had been abandoned in the desert gave way to someone humble, generous, and deeply fulfilled. He discovered that his true calling was not managing a drilling company, but rather using his technical skills to create something that would benefit an entire community. The oasis's reputation grew quickly among the nomadic communities and rural workers of the region. They began to receive not only desperate travelers, but also people who made deliberate detours on their routes to visit Mr. Daniel of the Oasis, as he became known. Some visitors offered work in exchange for lodging, helping to expand the facilities even further. One of the most significant additions was a small makeshift school where Daniel taught basic well drilling techniques and irrigation system maintenance. Many young people from the region came to learn from him, later taking this knowledge back to their own communities. It was a way of multiplying the project's positive impact far beyond the farm's boundaries. Guardian had become a local celebrity. The dog not only greeted visitors enthusiastically, but also developed an impressive ability to detect underground water sources. Several times Daniel followed the animal's indications and found new points for drilling, further expanding the site's water capacity. The first journalist visit happened almost a year after the desert abandonment. The reporter, sent by a regional newspaper, came to do a story on sustainable development initiatives in the backcountry. She was so impressed by Daniel's story and the Oasis project that she decided to write a series of articles about the transformation. The media exposure brought even more visitors, but also attracted the attention of governmental and non-governmental organizations interested in supporting the project. Daniel received funding proposals to expand the facilities and create a model that could be replicated in other arid regions of the country. It was during one of these meetings with government representatives that Daniel received a completely unexpected visit. Tyler appeared at the Oasis, visibly nervous and emotional. He had seen one of the reports about the project and finally decided to face the situation personally. The meeting between the two brothers was tense at first. Tyler threw himself at Daniel's feet, begging for forgiveness through tears and explaining how he had been deceived by Jessica and Brandon. He brought with him documents that proved his innocence in the original conspiracy and revealed that he had discovered the truth only months after the desert abandonment. Daniel embraced his younger brother, showing that he had truly forgiven all past betrayals. He explained that his experience at the Oasis had taught him that holding on to resentment only prevented personal growth and happiness. Tyler spent several days at the site, helping with the work and trying to understand how his brother had managed to turn so much suffering into something so positive. During these long conversations between the brothers, Tyler revealed disturbing details about Jessica and Brandon's mental state. According to him, guilt and the fear of prison had destroyed the relationship between the two traitors. They blamed each other for the situation and lived in constant conflict, having lost everything they thought they had gained through betrayal. Even more shocking was the revelation that Brandon had tried to find Daniel several times after discovering he had survived the abandonment. But shame and fear of his older brother's reaction prevented him from taking the final step and appearing in person to ask for forgiveness. He was consumed by guilt and the awareness of the harm he had caused. Tyler begged Daniel to consider receiving Brandon as well, arguing that the middle brother was genuinely remorseful and needed a chance at redemption. Daniel remained silent for a long time, looking at the crystalline spring that had become the center of his new life. Finally, he agreed, but with one condition: Brandon would have to come on his own, without intermediaries, and demonstrate his remorse through actions, not just words. 2 weeks later, on a hot December afternoon, a thin, unshaven man appeared walking down the road leading to the Oasis. Daniel recognized Brandon from a distance, but was shocked by his brother's physical transformation. The man who was once robust and confident now seemed consumed by guilt and remorse. The meeting was charged with emotion. Brandon approached slowly, as if expecting to be rejected at any moment. When they finally stood face to face, he broke down in tears, desperately asking for forgiveness and explaining that he had lived in hell since the day he participated in the desert abandonment. Brandon revealed that Jessica had psychologically manipulated him for years, exploiting his natural envy of his older brother and convincing him that Daniel looked down on them and was deliberately harming them. He admitted that he had always known deep in his heart that Daniel was innocent, but that hatred and greed had blinded his judgment. The most painful confession came when Brandon explained that his relationship with Jessica had been a devastating mistake that destroyed not only his family, but also his self-esteem and sense of morality. He had lost everything: money, respect, family, and, most importantly, peace of mind, in exchange for an illusion of power and wealth that never truly materialized. Daniel listened to everything in silence, processing his brother's words and remembering the teachings he had learned during his time at the oasis. The anger he might have felt was replaced by a deep understanding of how people can be led to commit terrible acts when manipulated by unscrupulous individuals. When Brandon finished his confession, Daniel did something that surprised everyone present, including Tyler and some visitors who were at the site. He hugged his brother firmly and said he forgave him completely. But that forgiveness came with responsibilities. If Brandon truly wanted redemption, he would have to work to undo the harm he had caused. Daniel's proposal was simple but challenging. Brandon could stay at the oasis and help with the project, but he would have to start from scratch, proving his worth through hard work and dedication to the needy visitors. There would be no privileges or special positions. He would be treated like any other volunteer who wanted to contribute to the common good. Brandon immediately accepted, demonstrating a humility his brothers had never seen in him before. In the following days, he dedicated himself to the most basic and difficult tasks of the oasis: cleaning, maintenance, carrying heavy water, always with a willingness and gratitude that impressed everyone around him. Brandon's transformation was gradual, but evident. The physical outdoor work, combined with the satisfaction of helping people in need, began to restore his self-esteem and sense of purpose. He discovered skills he never knew he possessed, and more importantly, rediscovered the ability to take pride in himself through positive actions. Tyler, seeing the reconciliation between the other two brothers, also decided to contribute to the Oasis project. He proposed using his personal savings to fund the construction of a more sophisticated water treatment system and the expansion of the lodging facilities. For the first time in decades, the three Crawford brothers were working together in harmony. The family project became even more ambitious when they discovered additional documents left by their father. Thomas had planned not just a support center, but an entire network of similar points spread across the region. He had identified other water sources and suitable lands, creating a detailed map of how to connect all these locations into an integrated support system for rural workers. Using the original plans as a guide, the three brothers began to visit other areas identified by their father. To their surprise, they found evidence that Thomas had begun preliminary work at several of these sites years before his departure. There were small abandoned structures, partially completed irrigation systems, and even signposts indicating the directions to each point in the network. The discovery brought a new emotional dimension to the project. The brothers realized they were not only continuing their father's dream, but also honoring his memory in a way he would certainly approve of. Thomas had always believed that water was a fundamental right that should be available to everyone, regardless of their economic situation. As the months passed, the Oasis network began to take shape. Tyler specialized in the logistical and administrative part, organizing supplies and coordinating with local authorities. Brandon discovered a natural talent for teaching drilling and maintenance techniques, becoming a respected instructor among the region's youth. Daniel remained the general coordinator and visionary of the project, but always maintaining his characteristic humility and availability for the most basic tasks. He had become an almost legendary figure in the region, known not only for his technical skills, but mainly for his generosity and wisdom. The success of the project caught the attention of international organizations dedicated to sustainable development in arid regions. A United Nations delegation visited the original oasis and was impressed with the results achieved. They offered technical and financial support to expand the model to other countries with similar problems. But the international recognition did not change the humble essence of the project. Daniel always insisted that the focus should remain on the needy people of the region itself, and that any expansion should be gradual and respectful of local characteristics. He had learned that true success was not measured by size or recognition, but by the positive impact on the lives of ordinary people. During an official ceremony where he received a merit medal for community service, Daniel was questioned by a reporter about how he had managed to forgive such deep betrayals and transform suffering into something so positive. His response, simple but profound, was widely quoted in the national media. "When you are dying of thirst in the desert," Daniel said, "it doesn't matter who dug the well that will save your life." What matters is that someone took the trouble to dig. I learned that carrying anger is like carrying stones in your luggage. It only slows you down and tires you out. It's better to use that energy to build something that helps other people. Daniel's life philosophy deeply influenced his brothers and everyone working on the project. Brandon, in particular, had become a living example of how redemption was possible through dedicated work and positive contribution to society. He often shared his story with visitors, always emphasizing the devastating consequences of envy and greed. 2 years after the initial abandonment in the desert, the three brothers were gathered on a Sunday afternoon by the original spring, watching a group of children from a local school who had come to visit the oasis. Guardian played happily with the children, who listened fascinated to stories about how an abandoned dog had saved Daniel's life. Tyler commented on the irony of the situation. If someone had told us 3 years ago that we'd be here, working together and happy, I'd say they were crazy. Brandon agreed, adding that he had learned that sometimes you need to lose everything to discover what truly has value in life. Daniel smiled, watching the children and remembering his own childhood in that same place. Maybe Dad always knew we'd come back here one day, he said. Maybe everything that happened was necessary for us to learn the lessons we needed to learn before carrying on his dream. At that moment, news arrived that would definitively close the painful chapter of the past. Walter, the merchant who had initially helped Daniel, brought information about Jessica's trial. She had been convicted of fraud and embezzlement, but the sentence included community service instead of prison, provided she demonstrated genuine remorse and made restitution for the damages caused. Even more surprising was the proposal that came with the news. Jessica had expressed a desire to work on the Oasis project as a way to fulfill her community service sentence. She claimed to be genuinely remorseful for her actions and wanted to use her administrative skills to positively contribute to something that would benefit the people who had been indirectly affected by her crimes. The proposal sparked debate among the brothers. Tyler was skeptical about Jessica's true intentions. Brandon felt uncomfortable with the idea of working close to the person who had manipulated him so deeply. Daniel, on the other hand, saw the situation as another opportunity to apply the principles of forgiveness and redemption that had become fundamental in his life. After long discussions and reflections, the three brothers decided to accept Jessica into the project, but with strict conditions. She would work at one of the most remote oases in the network, under constant supervision, and would have to prove her change through consistent actions over at least 2 years. Any sign of manipulation or inappropriate behavior would result in her immediate removal. Jessica's arrival at the project was tense and charged with emotion. She had changed drastically, her hair gray, her face lined with worry, and a humble posture that completely contrasted with the arrogant, manipulative woman of the past. Her first words were a sincere apology to each of the brothers, especially to Daniel and Brandon. Jessica explained that the months in pre-trial detention and the mandatory psychological therapy had helped her understand the gravity of her actions and the psychological mechanisms behind her destructive behavior. She had developed a painful understanding of how her manipulations and betrayals had destroyed not only the lives of others, but also her own ability to have healthy relationships. Jessica's initial work was deliberately basic and humiliating. She cleaned bathrooms, washed the dirty clothes of travelers, and helped in the community kitchen. She never complained or showed impatience, appearing genuinely grateful for the opportunity to contribute positively to something greater than her own interests. Gradually, as she demonstrated consistency in her behavior and attitude, Jessica began to receive greater responsibilities. Her organizational skills, when directed toward positive ends, proved valuable to the project's efficiency. She developed inventory control systems, organized maintenance schedules, and created reports that helped monitor the social impact of the work. But Jessica's true transformation became evident when she began working directly with the needy families who visited the oases. Her personal experience with the consequences of greed and manipulation made her particularly effective in counseling people facing difficulties related to family conflicts and trust issues. One particular situation demonstrated how much Jessica had changed. A young mother arrived at the oasis in a state of despair, fleeing a violent husband with 2 small children. Jessica spent hours talking with the woman, offering not only emotional support but also practical guidance on how to rebuild her life independently and safely. Watching Jessica interact with the young mother, Daniel felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing that his decision to allow redemption had resulted in something positive. There was also a curious inner peace, as if a karmic circle was finally closing harmoniously. 3 years after the desert abandonment, the Oasis Project had become a national reference in sustainable development and social inclusion. The network now included 12 support points spread over an area of more than 500 square kilometers, serving thousands of people annually. Each location maintained the same fundamental principles: free water, free emergency shelter, and technical support for communities wanting to develop their own irrigation systems. The project's indirect economic impact was also significant. Many families who received technical training at the Oases managed to establish small businesses related to well drilling and water system maintenance in their own communities. A new generation of specialized technicians was emerging in the region, reducing dependence on outside companies for basic water services. Daniel had become a respected figure not only locally, but in academic and governmental circles interested in rural development. He was often invited for lectures and consultations, but always insisted that his base remain at the original oasis, where it all began. For him, maintaining direct contact with people in need was essential to not lose perspective on the work's true purpose. The relationship between the three brothers had evolved into something completely different from what existed before the crisis. Instead of the old hierarchical dynamic, where Daniel was automatically considered the leader due to age, there was now an egalitarian partnership based on mutual respect and each one's specific contribution. Tyler had proven to be an exceptional administrator, Brandon a natural educator, and Daniel a practical visionary. Jessica had also found her place in the new family structure, though with a naturally more peripheral position. Her relationship with Brandon had transformed into a respectful but cautious friendship, based on mutual understanding of past mistakes and a commitment not to repeat them. She never again showed romantic interest in any member of the family, concentrating her energies entirely on social work. One of the most touching stories of the project involved a family of internal refugees who arrived at the main oasis completely helpless. They had lost everything in a devastating flood and had been traveling for weeks in search of a place where they could start over. The family included an elderly couple, 2 young adults, and 3 children. Daniel not only offered temporary hospitality, but also helped the family find a suitable area to establish a new home. He taught them drilling and irrigation techniques, helped build a small house, and connected them with government programs supporting homeless families. 2 years later, that family had become prosperous enough to begin helping others in need. Stories like this constantly multiplied, creating an organic network of solidarity that extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the oases. People who had been helped by the project often returned to contribute as volunteers or to bring other families in need. The concept of paying it forward had become a central self-sustaining philosophy. Guardian, now an older but still energetic dog, had become a sort of official mascot for the project. His story of loyalty and special intuition for finding water had inspired several families in the region to adopt abandoned dogs. The animal continued to demonstrate impressive abilities for detecting underground water sources, having helped locate more than 20 new drilling points. On a particularly significant afternoon, Daniel received a visit from a team of documentary filmmakers interested in telling the full story of the Oasis Project. During the interviews, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken him from abandonment in the desert to leadership of an initiative that transformed lives across the region. "The strangest thing," Daniel said to the camera, "is that I'm actually grateful for being abandoned that day. If it weren't for that seemingly cruel betrayal, I would never have discovered my true purpose in life. Sometimes, what seems like our greatest misfortune is actually our greatest opportunity." The reflection deeply touched everyone present, including Brandon, who wept openly upon hearing his brother's words. For him, who had carried the guilt for the betrayal for so long, hearing Daniel express gratitude for the experience was a complete emotional release. Finally, he was able to forgive himself completely. The documentary, when released, had national and international impact. The story of the Crawford brothers and the Oasis Project inspired similar initiatives in other countries with water access problems. Humanitarian organizations began studying the model as a sustainable alternative to traditional international aid programs. But for Daniel, external recognition was always secondary to the direct impact on the lives of the simple people who passed through the oases daily. He kept a notebook where he recorded the stories of each family that received significant help, creating a touching record of how small acts of generosity could have transformative consequences. One of the most moving entries in the notebook described the visit of a young woman who had passed through the oasis as a child 10 years earlier, when her family was fleeing the drought. She returned as a newly graduated doctor, offering her services free of charge to travelers in need of medical care. The girl who had been saved by the oasis water was now saving lives with her knowledge. Stories like this confirmed for Daniel that the project had transcended its original goals. It was no longer just about providing water and temporary shelter, but about creating a virtuous cycle of social transformation that perpetuated through generations. The children who passed through the oases grew up with a deep understanding of solidarity and social responsibility. The 5th anniversary of the desert abandonment was marked by a special celebration at the original oasis. Hundreds of people who had been helped by the project gathered to give thanks and share their own stories of overcoming adversity. The celebration included cultural performances, regional foods, and many tears of joy. During the ceremony, Daniel announced the creation of an official foundation to continue the work even after he and his brothers could no longer actively lead the project. The foundation would be governed by a board that included representatives from the beneficiary communities, ensuring that the people of the region had an active voice in the future direction of the oases. Tyler presented a detailed report on the measurable impact of the project. More than 50,000 people had received free water, nearly 3,000 families had been temporarily housed, over 1,000 young people had received technical training, and dozens of small businesses had been created as a direct result of the Oasis activities. Brandon shared more personal statistics. He had taught drilling techniques to more than 200 people, many of whom now worked as independent technicians in their own communities. For him, each person trained represented not only a source of income, but a multiplication of knowledge that could benefit many other families. Jessica, in an emotional speech, spoke about her personal journey of self-destruction and redemption. She publicly thanked the Crawford brothers for allowing her to demonstrate genuine change through positive actions. Her transformation had become an inspiring example for others facing the consequences of past poor choices. The most touching part of the celebration was when several families who had been helped by the Oases organized themselves to present their own project, the creation of a permanent technical school in the region specializing in sustainable technologies for arid areas. They had raised funds and secured government support to make the dream a reality. Daniel was deeply moved to realize that the people who had received help were now taking their own initiatives to help others. The cycle of generosity had become self-sustaining, exactly as his father Thomas had dreamed decades before. The Crawford family legacy was secured not through material possessions, but through a lasting social impact. During the celebration speeches, an old storyteller from the region, known as Master William, offered a reflection that would become one of the most remembered quotes of the event. Daniel Crawford was cast into the desert to be punished, but the desert gave him back to us as a gift. Sometimes the land knows better than people where each one should be. The celebration stretched into the night, with music, dancing, and many conversations around campfires. Families camped around the oasis, creating an atmosphere of unity and gratitude that all present would carry in their memories for the rest of their lives. Guardian moved among the groups, receiving affection from children and adults who remembered previous encounters. In the weeks following the anniversary, Daniel spent much time reflecting on the extraordinary journey he had lived. He recognized that, despite all the difficulties and betrayals, he had been immensely fortunate to discover his true purpose in life. Many people spend decades searching for meaning and never find anything so clear and impactful. The reflection led him to make an important decision about the future. Instead of gradually retiring from the Oasis activities, as some had suggested, he decided to dedicate himself even more intensely to the work. He wanted to use his remaining years to expand the project as much as possible and train a new generation of leaders to continue the work. Tyler enthusiastically supported the decision, proposing the creation of a formal mentorship program where young people from the region could work directly with the project's founders for periods of 1 to 2 years. The program would include not only technical training but also education in community leadership and sustainable development. Brandon suggested establishing partnerships with universities to create research programs on appropriate technologies for arid regions. He had observed that many useful innovations naturally arose from the practical work in the oases, but they could be systematized and improved with proper academic support. Jessica proposed focusing more attention on documenting and disseminating the project's experiences. She had noticed that many similar organizations faced problems the oases had already solved, but there were no efficient mechanisms to share this knowledge. Her administrative experience could be valuable in creating communication systems between similar projects. The synergy between the different perspectives of the 4 adults now collaborating harmoniously on the project was impressive. Each contributed unique skills, and all had learned to value each other's contributions. The dysfunctional dynamic of the original family had been completely transformed into a productive partnership based on mutual respect. One of the project's most ambitious expansions was the creation of mobile oases, specially equipped trucks that brought water, tools, and technical knowledge to remote communities that could not travel to the fixed points. The mobile oases operated on regular circuits, visiting each community every 2 months and offering continued training. The idea had emerged when Daniel realized that many elderly people and those with physical disabilities could not make the long journeys to the fixed oases. The trucks allowed the project to reach these vulnerable populations and also served to identify new areas where permanent oases could be established. Guardian, despite his advanced age, continued to accompany Daniel on the mobile oasis trips. The dog had become a valuable tool for detecting problems in existing water systems. He often sniffed out leaks or contamination that the human technicians had missed. His presence also brought emotional comfort to children and the elderly in isolated communities. The Mobile Oasis project revealed the impressive extent of water poverty in the region. Daniel was shocked to discover entire communities that depended on contaminated water or had access to water only once a week. The experience reinforced his conviction that the work they were doing was not only useful, but absolutely essential for human dignity. One of the communities visited by the mobile oases was particularly striking. It was a settlement of families who had lost their land due to prolonged drought and now lived in extremely precarious conditions. The children showed clear signs of malnutrition and water-related diseases. Daniel and his team spent an entire week in that community, drilling a deep well and installing a complete water purification and distribution system. They also taught basic subsistence farming techniques, adapted for arid conditions, and helped organize a cooperative system for managing water resources. 3 months later, when the mobile oasis returned to that community, the transformation was striking. The children were visibly healthier, families had started small gardens that provided fresh food, and the adults had organized to expand the irrigation system to adjacent areas. The clean water had been the catalyst for a complete social transformation. Cases like this multiplied throughout the region served by the mobile oases. Daniel began carefully documenting these transformations, creating a visual archive that demonstrated the power of clean water as a tool for social development. The before and after photographs of the benefited communities became powerful material for raising awareness among authorities and international organizations. The growing success of the project attracted the attention of critics who questioned the long-term sustainability of an initiative based on volunteer work. Some argued that the model created dependency instead of true autonomy in the benefited communities. Daniel took these criticisms seriously and began modifying the approaches to emphasize local empowerment even more. The response to the criticism came in the form of a graduation program where communities that received support from the oases for extended periods were gradually trained to take full responsibility for their water systems. The process included not only technical training, but also capacity building in financial management and community leadership. The first group of communities to graduate from the program was celebrated with a special ceremony where local representatives received certificates of water autonomy. These communities committed to passing their knowledge on to other needy areas, creating a network of multipliers that reduced dependence on the central oases. The strategy of gradual empowerment proved not only more sustainable, but also more impactful. The communities that took full control of their water resources demonstrated higher levels of social cohesion and initiative to solve other local problems. The clean water had become a starting point for much broader social transformations. The 8th anniversary of the desert abandonment was marked by an international conference on sustainable development in arid regions held at the original oasis. Experts from dozens of countries came to study the model developed by the Crawford brothers and discuss ways to adapt it to other geographical and cultural realities. Daniel was invited to give the opening lecture of the conference. In his speech, he emphasized that the most important aspect of the project was not the technologies or methods used, but the fundamental philosophy that every person deserves access to clean water regardless of their economic situation. Everything else, he said, were just technical details that could be adapted as needed. During the conference, the creation of an international oasis network inspired by the Brazilian model was announced. Organizations from 20 countries committed to establishing similar projects in their regions, adapting the techniques developed in the Sonoran Desert to different climatic and social conditions. Daniel was named honorary president of the international network, but insisted that his role would be purely advisory. He wanted to keep his focus on the direct work with the needy communities of his own region, believing that was where his contribution would be most effective and authentic. The conference also served to formalize partnerships with universities and research organizations interested in studying the technical and social aspects of the Oasis project. Scholarship programs were established for young people from the region who wanted to specialize in sustainable technologies for arid areas. One of the most impactful presentations at the conference was given by Emily Grace Peterson, a young engineer who had grown up in one of the first communities benefited by the mobile oases. She told how the arrival of clean water in her village had completely changed her life perspective and motivated her to study engineering so she could help other similar communities. Emily Grace had become a powerful symbol of the project's transformative potential. Her story demonstrated how relatively small investments in basic infrastructure could have profound generational impacts. She now led her own mobile oasis team, focusing specifically on indigenous communities in the region. At the end of the conference, the participants approved the Oasis Declaration, a document establishing fundamental principles for similar initiatives around the world. The declaration emphasized that clean water is a fundamental human right, that local solutions are always preferable to external impositions, and that the empowerment of beneficiary communities should be the ultimate goal of any development project. Daniel was deeply moved to realize how a personal experience of suffering and redemption had transformed into a global movement. He remembered his father's words about how small actions could have enormous consequences and felt he finally understood the true meaning of that wisdom. In the following years, the Oasis project continued to grow and evolve. New technologies were incorporated, such as solar purification systems and mobile applications, to coordinate resource distribution. But the heart of the project remained unchanged, the conviction that every person deserves basic dignity and that small acts of generosity can transform the world. Daniel, now over 50, had become an internationally respected figure, but never lost his characteristic humility. He continued sleeping in a simple hut at the original oasis, waking before dawn to check the water systems and receive the day's first travelers. Guardian had aged gracefully, becoming a calmer dog but still alert to visitors' needs. Daniel often joked that the dog was his most reliable consultant, able to intuitively sense when someone needed special attention or when there were technical problems with the water systems. The relationship between the project's 4 main partners had evolved into a deep and respectful friendship. Tyler had married and started a family, but maintained his commitment to the Oasis work. Brandon had found inner peace through teaching and now wrote books about community development. Jessica had become a respected counselor for people facing family crises. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset over the original Oasis, Daniel remarked to the others how their lives had unfolded in completely unexpected ways. "If someone had told me on that day in the desert that I would be here 10 years later, surrounded by friends and doing something that truly matters, I wouldn't have believed it." Brandon replied that he had learned that sometimes you need to lose your way completely to find the right path. "Our family needed to be destroyed so it could be rebuilt in a better way," he said. "And you, Daniel, needed to be abandoned to find your true home." Tyler added that the Oasis project had taught him that true success isn't measured in money or property, but in the positive impact we manage to have on other people's lives. "Dad always said our only real wealth is the lives we manage to improve," he recalled. Jessica, who often remained quiet during these family reflections, finally shared her own thoughts. "I destroyed everything I touched for years," she said, "but you allowed me to learn that it's always possible to start over, as long as it's with genuine intentions to help rather than harm." That night, the four stayed up late, sharing memories and making plans for the future. There was a proposal under discussion to create a permanent technical university in the region, specializing in sustainable solutions for rural communities. The project would require years of planning and fundraising, but everyone was excited about the possibility. The university would be more than an educational institution. It would be a research and development center that combined academic knowledge with the practical wisdom of local communities. Students from all over the world could come to learn not only techniques, but also the principles of community life that had made the Oasis project so successful. Daniel had been chosen to lead the university planning committee, but he insisted that the institution should be governed democratically by representatives from all communities benefiting from the Oases. He firmly believed that the people who lived the problems daily were the most qualified to define the necessary solutions. The university project attracted significant international support. Development organizations, governments, and private foundations offered funding, provided the institution maintained its focus on sustainable community development and accessible education for underserved populations. One of the most innovative features of the proposed university would be a program where half the students would be selected based on traditional academic merit, while the other half would be chosen based on their practical experience and commitment to their home communities. The idea was to create a learning environment where theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom complemented each other. As plans for the university developed, daily life in the Oases continued at its familiar pace. Each day brought new travelers, new stories, and new opportunities to help people in need. Daniel never tired of the variety of human experiences that passed through, from families seeking work to researchers studying adaptations to climate change. One particularly significant morning, Daniel was working on maintaining a pump when he noticed an elderly woman sitting alone near the spring, staring intently at the water. There was something in her posture that indicated deep sadness, so he gently approached to offer help. The lady introduced herself as Mrs. Dorothy, a 75-year-old woman traveling to her last son's funeral. She had lost her husband and 3 children over her lifetime, and now felt completely alone in the world. She was considering not returning home anymore, but simply giving up on life. Daniel sat beside Mrs. Dorothy and listened to her story with complete attention. When she finished speaking, he shared his own experience of loss and redemption, explaining how he had found new purpose exactly when everything seemed lost. He suggested she consider staying a few days at the Oasis to help with the visiting children who always needed maternal attention. Mrs. Dorothy ended up staying 2 weeks, during which she became a beloved maternal figure to several young families passing through the Oasis. Her life experience and practical wisdom were valuable to inexperienced mothers, and she discovered she still had much to offer the world. When she finally decided to return home, she had found a new reason to live. Mrs. Dorothy's story became one of many that Daniel kept as a reminder of the transformative power of community and shared purpose. He had learned that helping others was often the best way to heal his own wounds, and that everyone, regardless of age or circumstances, had valuable contributions to make. Years passed, and the Oasis project became established as a permanent institution in the region. The network now included over 30 fixed points and a fleet of 15 mobile oases. Thousands of people had been directly benefited, and the indirect impact through empowered communities was impossible to calculate. Daniel, now in his mid-50s, began to think seriously about succession and legacy. He wanted to ensure the project continued to thrive even after he could no longer actively lead it. Creating solid organizational structures and training young leaders became his top priorities. Emily Grace Peterson, the young engineer who had grown up in a community benefited by the Oases, was chosen as Daniel's natural successor in the project's technical leadership. She had demonstrated not only exceptional competence, but also the kind of selfless dedication that was crucial to maintaining the original mission. The leadership transition was planned to happen gradually over 3 years. Daniel would work side by side with Emily, transferring not only technical knowledge, but also the practical wisdom and ethical principles that had guided the project from the beginning. It was essential that the new leadership understood that the human aspect was always more important than the technological one. During this transition period, Daniel spent much time reflecting on the extraordinary journey he had lived. From a bitter man abandoned in the desert, he had transformed into someone whose work positively impacted the lives of thousands of people. The transformation seemed almost impossible in hindsight, but it had happened one step at a time. He acknowledged that many people had contributed to his personal transformation and to the project's success. Guardian, now a very old but still faithful companion dog, had been crucial in the early days. Walter, the merchant, had provided crucial guidance at the right moments, but perhaps most importantly, the very people in need who had trusted him over the years had given him purpose and direction. Daniel's life philosophy had crystallized into a few simple principles he often shared with visitors and students. Every person has inherent value. Small acts of kindness can have great consequences, and true wealth comes from contributing to something greater than ourselves. These principles had guided all his major decisions over the past 15 years. One of Daniel's last major initiatives as project leader was the creation of a permanent fund to ensure the financial sustainability of the Oases. The fund would be supported by donations, revenue from optional services offered to tourists and researchers, and partnerships with companies committed to social responsibility. The goal was to create a solid financial base that would allow the Oases to continue operating indefinitely, regardless of political or economic changes. Daniel had seen many social projects fail due to financial instability and was determined not to let that happen to his life's work. The campaign to establish the permanent fund was surprisingly successful. Many of the people and communities that had been benefited by the Oases over the years contributed what they could, even if the amounts were small. International organizations and companies also made significant donations, inspired by the transformation story and the project's demonstrable results. When the fund reached the amount necessary to guarantee indefinite operations, a grand celebration was organized at the original Oasis. Thousands of people attended, including international dignitaries, academics, social activists, and most importantly, hundreds of families whose lives had been transformed by the Oases. During the celebration ceremony, Daniel gave what would be his final major speech as the active leader of the project. His words were simple, but deeply moving. "When I was abandoned in this desert 15 years ago, I thought my life was over. In truth, it was just beginning. I learned that our greatest strength comes not from what we can get for ourselves, but from what we can give to others." He continued, "This project was never about me or my family. It was about proving that when good people work together for something greater than their own interests, miracles can happen. You are the miracle. Every life transformed, every community empowered, every child who grew up with clean water. You are the proof that it is worth believing in the best of humanity." The speech ended with Daniel officially announcing his transition to an advisory role and the appointment of Emily Grace Peterson as the new executive director of the project. He expressed complete confidence that the new leadership would take the Oases to even greater levels of impact and influence. The transition was emotionally difficult for Daniel, who had dedicated all his mature adult energy to the project. But he recognized that it was time to allow a new generation to take responsibility and bring fresh perspectives to future challenges. His role now would be to support and advise when necessary, but no longer to lead actively. In the months following the transition, Daniel spent much time simply observing and appreciating what had been built. He walked through the Oases, talked with visitors and workers, and documented stories he considered important to preserve. It was a different way of contributing, but equally valuable. One of the activities that brought him the most satisfaction was working with the children who visited the Oases with their families. Daniel had become a skilled storyteller, able to capture the imagination of the little ones, while teaching important lessons about cooperation, generosity, and respect for nature. The stories he told were often based on real experiences from the Oases, but adapted to be appropriate and inspiring for children. He spoke of brave dogs that saved lost travelers, of families who learned to work together to solve difficult problems, and of how small acts of kindness could spread like ripples in water. Guardian, now very old but still present in Daniel's stories, had become a living legend among the children of the region. Many families brought their children specifically to meet the famous dog who had saved the founder of the Oases. The animal, always patient and gentle, seemed to understand his symbolic importance and behaved appropriately. One quiet afternoon, as Daniel told stories to a group of children in the shade of the date palms at the original oasis, Guardian slowly approached and lay down beside his human companion. The dog was clearly weak and tired, but his eyes still shone with intelligence and affection. That night, Guardian passed away for the last time. Daniel held the faithful companion in his arms as he breathed calmly for the last time, surrounded by the gentle sound of running water that had defined their lives together. It was a moment of deep sadness, but also of immense gratitude for all the years of companionship and shared adventures. Guardian's funeral became an unforgettable community event. Hundreds of people who had known the dog over the years came to pay their respects. Children brought flowers, adults shared memories, and a special headstone was erected near the original spring with the inscription, "Guardian, the dog who saved a man and helped save thousands." The loss of Guardian marked the symbolic end of an era for Daniel. The dog had been his most direct connection to the desperate early days in the desert and his subsequent transformation. Without Guardian by his side, Daniel felt more aware of his own mortality and the importance of ensuring the project's legacy was properly preserved. In the months following Guardian's passing, Daniel dedicated himself intensively to writing his memoirs. He wanted to document not only the main events of his journey, but also the lessons learned and the evolution of his personal philosophy. The book would be his final contribution to ensuring future generations understood the fundamental principles that had made the project successful. Writing the memoirs proved to be a deeply therapeutic process, revisiting the most difficult moments of his life, the betrayal, the abandonment, the initial despair in the desert, helped Daniel fully process these experiences and find final peace with his past. He recognized that even the most painful moments had been necessary for his transformation. When the book was published, titled From Desert to Oasis, A Journey from Betrayal to Redemption, it immediately became a national and international bestseller. Daniel's story resonated with people of all ages and backgrounds, especially those facing their own crises of purpose or personal betrayals. The book's success brought renewed international attention to the Oasis project. More organizations offered to replicate the model in their own countries, and a formal exchange program was established to allow practitioners from different regions to learn from each other. Daniel used the book royalties to establish scholarships for young people from underprivileged communities who wanted to study engineering, social management, or other areas relevant to community development. It was his way of ensuring the next generation had even more tools to create positive change in their own regions. At 60, Daniel had fully settled into his role as a wise counselor and guardian of the project's institutional memory. He continued to live in the original oasis, but now in a more comfortable cabin that had been built specifically for his needs as an older person. His daily routine included morning walks to check the water systems, counseling sessions with workers facing challenges, and long afternoons telling stories to visitors or writing reflections on community development. It was a simple but deeply satisfying life. Emily Grace had proven to be an exceptional leader, bringing youthful energy and innovative ideas to the project without abandoning its core principles. Under her leadership, the Oases had incorporated new sustainable technologies, expanded their educational programs, and established stronger partnerships with international organizations. The relationship between Daniel and Emily Grace had evolved into something akin to father and daughter, based on mutual respect and shared vision. She often sought his advice on difficult decisions, and he was always impressed by her wisdom and maturity. The choice of Emily Grace as his successor had clearly been correct. Tyler, Brandon, and Jessica had also found ways to contribute meaningfully to the project in their reduced roles. Tyler managed the permanent fund with exemplary competence, ensuring the resources were used responsibly and sustainably. Brandon had become the project's lead documentarian, creating educational materials and training programs that were used internationally. Jessica had found her calling working with families in crisis, using her own experience of downfall and redemption to help others navigate through difficult times. She had become a respected and sought-after counselor, able to offer unique perspectives on forgiveness, new beginnings, and genuine behavioral change. The dynamic among the four had matured into a deep and lasting friendship, based on shared experiences and a common commitment to something greater than themselves. They would regularly gather for dinners and long conversations, always finding new perspectives and insights about the work they were doing. End of story. And you, what did you think of this moving story of overcoming and forgiveness? Could you feel Daniel's transformation journey from abandonment in the desert to becoming a leader who changed thousands of lives? Leave in the comments what touched you most in this narrative and what lesson you will take to your own life. If this story inspired you, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one.